How did you and Jolly get involved in cult-related matters, clinically or otherwise?
Well, Jolly had already published a couple of articles about cult-related things because of his history with the Korean War. But he was called by Judge Oliver Carter and asked to examine Patty Hearst. And he asked, this was right after she was found, so he asked me if I would come with him to do some staff work. So we went to Redwood City. She was in jail there. He interviewed her 10 times, and I transcribed all the tapes of the interviews. Particularly the one I remember, just as an aside, is where she talks about being in the closet and being raped in the closet. And as I was typing that, tears were just streaming down my face. So it ended up that he was asked by the defense to be an expert witness. And once again, I went as a staff person and staffed not only what he needed, but Bob Lifton, Martin Orne, and Margaret Singer. Margaret Singer and I were the only 2 women in this whole thing. And here was F. Lee Bailey and his group, and it was all men, except Margaret and I. So we kind of bonded. We really enjoyed each other. About a year after that, so that would have been 77 or so, Margaret called me and asked me if she was coming down to give a talk at the Jewish Family Service. Could she stay with me? And I said, of course. What are you going to talk on? She said, I'm going to give a talk on cults. I said, what is a cult? She said, come to the lecture and you'll find out. So that was about 1977 or so. She gave her talk, and as she was talking, I was just blown away by what she was saying, because I had been handling calls into the office from parents who were just frantic because their kids had dropped out. They'd said they didn't want to talk to them anymore. There was this complete separation. The kids had gone with some sort of group. Parents didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. Jolly didn't handle most of those calls, and so he knew what was going on. Anyway, so I volunteered to help the Jewish Family Service start the cult clinic, and that was the beginning of 13 years of volunteer work in the field. Jolly and I did do some combined things, like we actually gave a brief workshop to some members of Parliament in London. One of the members of the House of Commons knew about cults and asked for this, and it was an open invitation. So that was very interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember, you want me just to keep going?
Yeah, sure.
I remember one of the early, at that time it was AFF, conferences in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. I was living in California at that time. But it was very early on, I'm sure the early 80s. And several Scientologists decided they would attend. And I'll never forget watching Jolly and Heber Jensch. I think most people will know who that was. Big wig in Scientology. And Heber was just pounding Jolly, verbally just pounding, and Jolly stood there very calmly and listened, and then said his piece, which just refuted everything that Jensch had said. It was just a beautiful, I wish I'd had a picture of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's how we got involved.
Yeah, and AFF was
The
known to you guys?
Oh, absolutely. I was on the board.
How did that begin?
How
is
did
my question. How did you get involved with AFF?
Well, it was Mike Langoni and I don't remember exactly at what point. Michael and I put together the Wingspread Conference on cults.
When you first volunteered with the Jewish Family Services, and when you were getting calls, and knowing that Jolly had been involved with the Korean War brainwashing, was there any question of what to call this? Was it, did you have a sort of a philosophical approach that this was brainwashing? Did you use that term in those days?
No, we didn't use that term. He didn't use that term at that time because it's such a misunderstood term. And if you're not in the field, don't know the literature, you have all kinds of ideas about what. So it was more mind control.
Yeah.
It was more separation from society. We called them cults.
Yeah, sure. My mom, I remember Margaret had this, kind of came up with a definition of unethical social and psychological influence.
Right.
Which is a fancy way of saying what you
Right.
perceive Jack Clark and AFF.
Oh, I thought they were amazing people. Absolutely amazing. To be so brave and to approach this problem, this challenge, from a research and educational perspective. That was really important. And clearly, we can see as it's developed and then became ICSA, it's doing marvelous work. It's so necessary, but the organization found a way to do it without creating waves that then the cults could react to. They tried to, but
Who was behind the getting the Wingspread conference? I assume
It was
that it
Jolly.
was Jolly because he had the stature to
Right.
do something like that.
that's my memory
Yeah,
of what it was.
yeah. How did your professional peers, or at least Jolly's, view his, what can I say, his involvement in these issues?
You're asking me to speak, to say how they viewed it?
Yeah.
I think that many of them felt he was very brave in what he did. And a few thought he was, if I could only think of the word, barnstorming. Is that the right word?
Grandstanding?
Grandstanding.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah.
Well, not that he was wrong-headed and this was a
No,
bad,
no. Just
No,
that
no.
they had such an ego, that.
Okay. Not the usual religious, don't look into religious groups kinds of
Oh, no, no,
approach.
no.
Okay.
No.
Because that was fairly common. Were you hassled by various groups?
Oh.
You talked about Scientology.
Oh, Scientology, absolutely.
And
And
what-
at
any
UCLA, they picketed the Neuropsychiatric Institute many times. Oh, the first time that I ran into them, which was before I really knew who these people were, came right up to me and banged on my desk and said, "I want every file you have on Scientology." And I said, "We don't have any." "Oh, yes, you do." And he was, so I got the head of the hospital who was there, came and dealt with them and got rid of them. They threatened to sit in.
Any threats of lawsuits?
No, not threats of lawsuits, but they wrote wrote letters to the chancellor several times suggesting that Jolly and I both be fired because we were anti-religious and anti-free speech and, you know, the usual stuff. We weren't fired.
Any action to give you bad names in the community with your neighbors?
Yes.
Like Jack had to defend the suit.
Well, I had the experience. I don't know. I don't remember one with Jolly, but
Well, you and Jolly are...
yeah. Well, because I did much of what was done. I was living in a condo in West Los Angeles, and I looked out on a side street, had a nice big patio, and one day I noticed there was a car that was parked across the street from my patio. And then the next day that same car was there, and I looked more closely, and there were two people sitting in it, one with binoculars, and they were staring up at my patio. And then they were there a third day and a fourth day. So I decided I would just simply write a note to all of the people in the condo, telling them what was going on and not to be worried if they saw this car there day after day. And eventually the car didn't come anymore.
Good, good. Is that the last time they bothered you?
No.
Oh.
The worst thing they did was on Valentine's Day one year, I came back from having dinner with a friend, and I came around to my condo door, which had to go around a corner. And as I rounded the corner, there stood a man who must have been 6'5", with his back, he was, you know, trying not to be seen. And I looked and he said, "Are you Marsha Addis?" And I just started screaming. And I ran back down the hall. One of my friends came out. We ran down the stairs, et cetera, et cetera. He chased us. He never caught up with us, but when I got back to we did call the police. When I got back to my condo, on the door was is it a subpoena? Anyway, to be deposed in the very first lawsuit that Scientology sued against the Citizens Freedom Foundation. And this may be more than what you're interested in, but I decided I have to have an attorney with me. So I searched and searched, and there was one firm in LA, I can't remember the name of it, that was very socially conscious. And they assigned one of their junior attorneys to work with me. When I met with them, I said, "You really need to understand this organization and how they approach things." He said, "Well, there are rules, you know, there are rules. They just have to follow the rules." I brought him a big binder of information about Scientology and said, "No." He said, "Just remain calm. It will be okay." So we go to the deposition, and what they really wanted to ask me about, they wanted to find something about Jolly that they could, you know, do something about. Well, there isn't anything. There wasn't anything. This went on for 4 hours. They were harassing me, and my attorney was turning redder and redder. And finally, he lost it. You know, what I told him would happen did happen. And he said, "That's it. My client and I are leaving." And we got up and walked out.
Yeah. I was at one deposition with Jack, and it was a very distressing. Very distressing. Didn't find out anything, but it was still very distressing. What was your title during this period with Jolly? I mean, it may have changed, but I've got to give you a title.
Yeah, I was the chief of administrative staff,
Okay.
and my focus was research and education.
Got it. Yeah.
But I learned a lot about how to work with families from a clinical perspective. I volunteered for years with the Cult Clinic.
Right.
And I also, with Meyer Lightman, published an article called The Cult Clinic Helps Families in Crisis. That was the lead article in Social Casework in, I think, November 1988.
Yeah. Can you talk about your connection with CAN and other awareness groups?
the Cult Awareness Network,
Yeah.
which before that was a Citizens Freedom
That's
Foundation.
right.
Yeah. My connection was that I went to every one of their conferences. I knew the executive director. I interacted with her
Yeah.
a lot. I wasn't formally part of the organization, but very involved with it.
Can you evaluate the difference between AFF and CAN in those years?
Well, I think I already mentioned that, CF CAN
Yeah.
was really focused strictly on helping families and people who were swept up into cults.
Yeah.
They were very family oriented.
Yeah.
That was their first name, Citizens Freedom Foundation. And AFF was focused on education and research.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a very clear distinction.
How do you evaluate Margaret's influence in this whole issue?
Oh my, she's probably the most influential person because she was very articulate, very smart, and she was one of the first clinicians, like Jack was, who understood what the problem was and who was able to work with families of cult members and with people who'd come out also. She also published a lot. She gave many speeches. She was an expert witness. She did everything in the field.
Yeah.
And she was the nicest, most helpful person. She was really something.
Yeah. She struck me as, among other things, very calm and laid back when she was dealing with issues, as opposed to being hysterical about it.
She was very, she did stay with me several times when she came down to LA. And she's just delightful. She loved classical music.
Yeah.
And a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
But just calm all the time.
Yeah. Well, I think that's about it. This has been great.